Enneagrams. We do have courses coming up, so you can look at narrativeenneagram.org if you're interested in getting more depth of training in this transformative work through panel interviewing. So I just make a little plug for the organization.
All right, narrativeenneagram.org. I'll put that in the chat.
Yeah.
All right. So Renee, thank you so much. Let me know how I can support you. And you're up. Let me take this down. And we
Okay.
are recording. So thanks,
Okay.
everybody.
Thank you, Nancy, for that very generous introduction. And we have spent a lot of time together over the years, early on at the People House too, is what I remember. But anyway, I'm glad to be here. I'm glad to share two of my passions, the Enneagram, and I'm a mindfulness practitioner. So bringing these two together, I've taught 4 or 5 courses on this, sometimes with my mindfulness teacher, but I find it just a really dynamic duo because the Enneagram is a wonderful map, but mindfulness is the practice. It's the method of how we actually create more transformation. So glad to be here with you all and for the invitation and to support the IA Colorado, which is a wonderful organization. It sounds like you're doing amazing things. So really good to hear about all of that. I will say as I present too, so I'm going to talk for a while. I've got slides, I'll put them up. But as we go along too, just raise your virtual hand if you have a question. And, ask for questions at the end, and then you'll go into breakout groups to share a little bit about what I've presented to see if it resonates with you or not. And then we'll come back out more for Q&A. We'll just see how all the time works out. But glad to be here and to see you all. So thanks for spending the evening with us. I'm sharing my screen. So the name of this talk is Enneagram and Mindfulness, Transforming Reactivity into Wisdom. And we know that our type has amazing survival strategies that are reactive and automatic. And we really want to use, as Nancy said in the introduction to me, how do we actually use these things that we often feel like we want to get rid of to help us awaken and actually to work to be more present in our everyday life. If I can get things. So the overview, as many of you I'm sure know, historically the Enneagram was an inquiry. So we think about 2,000 years ago, the Desert Fathers, and the question was, what stands between me and God? I can be in a contemplative or meditative place, and then, as my teacher would say, Helen Palmer, then I come out and act like a jerk. What is it that stands between me and God? So we know the Enneagram is just a brilliant map that describes these adaptive strategies that help us survive. They are really brilliant and to be regarded well. That's what I want to say. Sometimes it's like, oh, we need to get rid of that stuff. It's like, it's really useful energy, and it's really helped us survive personally and, for thousands of years. So one of the ways we start to work with this, of course, as you probably all know, is awareness. We work with being aware of our type pattern, because the truth is, and in Nancy's overview slide, she said the type you're navigating with. I like that. We often say the type you're leading with, because you have a pattern, you have a type, but you're more than that. And so awareness is the first step to get kind of this gap between you and what arises as this adaptive strategy, as a bringer of many gifts. Also, I like to think of kind of working with our type is about freeing the gifts that the type brings. So it's not a mistake. So awareness gives us some choice about how we respond to what arises, thoughts, feelings, sensations. And it creates this gap. It's like, oh, there's part of me that's aware, and I'm noticing this pattern, right? I'm noticing what is arising. That is a big deal. It's a huge first step. And I know it's not new to many of you, but to some of you maybe, and it's really important to remember that you have a type, but you're more than that. So the Enneagram has this great map and exploration, and certainly in our work with the Enneagram through the years and all of the burgeoning interest in the Enneagram, there are many ways to work with the map. there are many modalities. I'm choosing a favorite modality and one that we, use without talking about it specifically in the narrative, which is actually to use mindfulness to be present with what is, to support our work with seeing these repeating patterns. So it's a practice that allows us to keep understanding the repeating patterns of our type. And the first thing that's really important is you are more than your type. So mindfulness, which basically is just really, it is about being present with how things are, right? It is just like, oh, this is what's happening now. I have this thought arising. I was thinking earlier today in reviewing my slides, I had a thought about that. I had a feeling maybe about that. My body felt pretty grounded when I was thinking about that, right? But it helps us to actually see what's really happening in the present moment inside of us in each of our centers, other than just what the type would automatically propel us towards. So as a three-centered practice, mindfulness helps us witness the thoughts related to our type pattern. So I lead with a type 2, as does Nancy. We're two buddies in that way. And so again, there's a lot of thought about relationship. How am I doing? How's this connection going? So I can actually witness the thought. It's like, oh yeah, there's the repetitive pattern. And I can discern my emotional experience, what's happening in my heart. Sometimes when I'm having those thoughts, it's like, I wonder if what I said was okay. Maybe the connection's off a little bit. It's like I can start to see, oh, that is the emotional experience related to what's arising. I have a thought, I have emotional experience about it. And then importantly, because mindfulness is about relating to all, but so much of the core is this kind of frontier. Maybe it's not the final frontier, but it's a frontier of how do we relate to our body. So when I have that emotion about wondering, like, is our connection okay? And I might feel a little urgency about doing something about that. Like, I think I'll call up. I don't know, is Nancy liking me? I think I'll just call up and like, how are you doing, Nancy? Like, make nice or something. There can be like a little urgency in my body to do something. So mindfulness helps me to clarify and untangle that into the sensory components. So for me, I know when there is a disturbance as a 2 in the connection, there's often some urgency, panicky feeling to reach out and do something. As I've become more aware through practice, and I notice that coming out with this bundle, which is really interesting for all of us. What's your bundle relative to your type? I can pause, right? It's like, okay, wait, there's something going on for me inside, and I don't want to just repeat the pattern. So it helps us really clarify these components of our inner experience. And when we do that, we loosen the type structure. It isn't because it happens so fast, right? So instead of it just happening so fast, we start to get some space. And with that space, we can be more receptive to something that's greater. And so on that note, because I realize I did not do it at the beginning, we're going to take a pause and do an inner practice, which seems like a really good spot, actually, serendipitously to do it. So if you will, I like to just get settled when I'm wanting to bring my attention in. I kind of move around a little bit. Maybe sense your body supported by the chair or where you're seated, your feet on the floor. And if it works for you, allow a breath to invite you in. I see the breath as an invitation into our inner landscape. If that doesn't work for you, you can stay with your body supported by the chair, your hands on your lap, your feet on the floor. But if it's comfortable, follow your breath in and down. Just noticing it as it enters your nostrils And then turns and moves down into your body. Allowing yourself to just relax with the breath. No need to do anything special with it. But notice the sensations of the breath if you can. Maybe your belly or your chest expand as you inhale, and they release as you exhale. So you might notice these expansive and more contractive energies in your body. And if you can, I would really invite you to feel your body center. Think of the lower abdomen, the deep belly. If you can let your deep belly be soft, you can even put your hands on your abdomen just below your belly button. And maybe you feel some expansion and contraction in your belly as you breathe. This place of grounded presence. There's usually not much content. It's driven by the mind in the belly. And it can bring ease and relaxation to our whole system. And I invite you, no matter what you're noticing about that invitation, to just allow things to be as they are. Maybe another sensation in your body, a discomfort, a tension, or a place of space, call your attention. Can you just allow that to be? Again, mindfulness is really, can we both direct our attention to choose where we place it and also allow things to be as they are? Can we be friendly towards our inner experience rather than the automatic, oftentimes reactivity to get away from pain, which is quite perfect in its survival mechanism. We need that. But sometimes the discomfort's okay to meet. And if we support ourselves with grounded presence here in this moment, with this breath, in this body, often those discomforts are easier to be present with. And I invite you now to bring your attention to your heart center. And once again, if you like, to put your hand on your heart, which might help collect attention there, be a kind gesture to our heart center, feelings, emotions. And can you feel the breath as it moves your chest. And in the heart center, the center of attunement and connection with others in the world and even ourselves. Emotional intelligence, qualities like compassion, care, love. When we're working with mindfulness, you'll hear me say again and again, can we bring kind awareness to something, a little softness? Heart allows us to do that. And even now, as we just do this short practice, maybe you can actually sense bringing yourself a little kindness for your inquiry, for showing up, for your desire to grow and support those around you in the same effort. And if there's something difficult, a difficult emotion or some tension arising, again, can you just bring some kind presence to that? Nothing to fix or manage, at least for this moment, just to be. And finally, if we bring our attention to our head center, the center of intelligence that brings us so much both awareness and understanding and visioning and possibility, curiosity. Oftentimes in mindfulness, there's what seems like kind of a pejorative viewpoint on thinking, but it's not about not thinking. It's about using our thinking wisely. So can we appreciate the brilliance of the head center and how it helps us to navigate the world? And again, if there are disturbing thoughts, challenges in self-perception, even the inner critic, is it possible to see that as part of the kind of defensive quality of the type structure that manifests in the head? And that we can even be curious about the function of those things to protect us and keep us in familiar territory. And again, meeting our thinking selves with kindness. And as we get to the end of the inner practice, I invite you, if you are following your breath, to take a few full breaths. And can you potentially feel it move through each of your centers? Head to heart to body, or body to heart to head. The brilliance of these centers of intelligence, can we appreciate them and all they help us dance with in the world? Okay. Thank you for your attention. And thank you for your patience, Nancy, and me forgetting the order of what I'm supposed to be doing. So
I
I
actually
just,
think it worked out perfectly. It
I do,
was, yeah, I think it
those things kind of happen sometimes. I love that.
because you introduced what it is and then we did it.
I planned that all along, really. Okay. So again, as much as you can, I encourage you, there's going to be a lot of cognitive stuff, but as much as you can, just see how it resonates with you. I'm going to introduce a couple of, potentially, if you're not a mindfulness practitioner, new elements to looking at the Enneagram. So I've just said a lot of this, but my mindfulness teacher, who's a local man I've been studying with for a long time, he says mindfulness is actually kindfulness. And I just love that. It's like you can't practice mindfulness without kindfulness, without kindness. Kindness really allows things to be as it is. If you're angry, you're sad, it really, mindfulness, awareness with kindness doesn't care. We might have a preference for something, certainly, but it's just curious. Mindfulness is about the same curiosity. One of the other things he shared with me, which I love this practice, because oftentimes when we have our type structure comes up and there's some kind of like repetitive pattern, I'm here again, I can't believe I'm here again, the typical old reactivity, we kind of like that inner critic can get a hold of it and it's like, oh, I can't believe I know better than this, right? We have a whole bunch of thoughts about that. And without speaking to the Enneagram directly, he said, when we have these things arise that are repetitive, that we don't necessarily prefer or like, we just say, of course. Well, of course that's there. It's a really light way to acknowledge the pattern without getting, uh, without indulging it. Because too often we get kind of caught up in like, why is it happening? I mean, Enneagram helps a lot with this, but trying to figure it out. If actually something arises when that, for me, I'll use myself as an example, of course, when there's some sense of like, oh, is that person, are they mad at me or did I do something wrong or, some other issue? I can just like the type is coming up, of course. Because we have neural pathways that are encoded with these patterns we've been practicing, many of us for many decades. And so we just say, of course. And I really love that. You cannot judge yourself into mindfulness. If you are letting the inner critic encourage you to be like, you must pay attention to this, you must do that, oh my God, you did this wrong, you are sunk, right? There is no way to judge yourself into mindfulness. It really creates, it is essential to practice kindness. And pure awareness, which does not have thoughts, opinions, pure awareness reflects everything just as it is actually immense kindness in itself. Everything belongs. That is really opposite to how we experience most of our lives. I want this about myself. I don't want that. This doesn't belong. I need to be like this. What if everything belongs? What happens then? Okay, so now we're going to get into the meat of it here. So in the mindfulness, this is the Theravada Buddhist tradition. We talk about feeling tone, uh, different than what we would consider feelings. And that's this automatic response our system and brain has to register whatever is arising as pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral. So there's an immediate response that just like says, oh yeah, this is good, that's not good. And like, I'm not even going to pay attention to that because I don't notice it. So our brains are always registering that. That's usually below our awareness, because usually it's the next layer of kind of things that we do about that we become more aware of. But that feeling tone is really kind of more, it is deeper and closer to the bone, I want to say. And if we can start paying attention to feeling tone, what we're registering, we can cut through a lot of the afflictive, challenging emotions that arise. So I just want to pause and make sure that makes sense, what feeling tone is. If anybody has a question about that, there are things we like that come up, there are things we don't like, and then there are things that we just ignore. That's basically what's registered as pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral. And it's something you can watch for. That all makes sense? Just wanna, yeah, okay. So in the mindfulness tradition, based on these three feeling tones, there's three basic afflictive emotions that arise. And that's greed, aversion, and delusion. So the emotions that we might think of as in the narrative, in the Enneagram tradition, anger, sadness, fear, etc. If we just think of the three dominant centers, these are all arising to deal with feeling tone. We want what's pleasant, we don't want what's unpleasant, and we ignore the neutral. And the tendency is, and I'm going to say a lot more about greed, aversion, delusion, but the tendency is that one of those, and greed is like desire. I want this. Aversion is like, I don't want that. And delusion is like, I'm ignoring things. I don't even know what's going on. Right. And that in this view of looking at things, one of our dominant center, we tend to use one of those more than the other. We use all of them, of course, but one is more dominant based on our dominant center of intelligence. Everybody still with me? Okay, so heart center types, starting with ourselves, we primarily rely on this desire or greed. And some of these words sound, maybe too intense. Greed, but it's this desiring, right? We want something from out there. All the heart types, right? We want love, we want approval, recognition, appreciation, connection. We primarily rely on this wanting something. And that wanting is really grounded in wanting to get a value for ourselves from outside, right? So if you like me, I'm doing an okay job right now, I'm good. If I'm not, it's a problem, right? But again, all the heart types are looking, and I'll go through each of the types, are looking to get something from outside. We are wanting something. We are what in the mindfulness tradition we would call greed types. And our primary emotional response as heart types, and again, even though I'm saying this as the heart center, I like everybody is to think about like we have all three, right? We have all three centers of intelligence. Everybody has a heart, everybody has a head, everybody has a body. We can all lean into one of these more at a particular time. We're just looking again I think the Enneagram as a template to explore yourself versus like, oh, heart types, therefore actually heart types equal desire. And it's never heart types equal aversion. Like I really encourage you to like use it to explore yourself as we go through the evening versus making it something rigid. But in general, as a template, the primary emotional response, people with a dominant heart center, to not gaining what we're trying to get, approval, connection, etc., is to feel sadness, to feel grief at the loss of contact, to feel shame or not good enough. There's a primary emotion that arises for us when this wanting something comes up. And if I was going to do a quick hierarchy to kind of excavate to explore ourselves, if like feeling tone is kind of at the basement level, and then the first floor would be what we do relative to that. So maybe we're wanting. And then there's the emotional response when that need, because these are all needs, love, affection, approval, recognition, those are needs, right? According to the type, right? When those are threatened or not met, then there's this other emotional response that happens. So we often work in our awareness with that. I work with my sadness, work with my shame because the connection's off or not good enough. And what mindfulness is actually inviting us to do is can we inquire a little deeper? Because the more to the core we get, the more we intervene on this very speedy response. And it's not easy, right? Because this stuff all happens like that. Happens very quickly. So it takes a lot of awareness and being mindful to actually start to catch and be curious. Even if like I was feeling shame about some connection or something, like, oh, there was shame there. Yeah, I really wanted something from that connection because I thought it was going to give me something pleasant. Right? So we can go either way, but if we can catch it at the bottom there, we can get in on something early. And that can be really helpful in not going through our whole type pattern. So that's in general for all of these three. I'm going to just pause again. Anybody comment, question?
Renee.
Yeah, Maggie.
So, you're saying that the greed and the desire are more of the root? That's more the base. And then the shame and the sadness is that other emotional response to desire and greed?
Yes, and I would say, but the closer to the root is this wanting something pleasant. Like there's that feeling tone piece, right? There's this, oh, connection feels good. I want that. Right. So I'm going to go out and pursue it. So that's that pleasant is kind of at the root of wanting.
Yeah. So if we're staying kind of at just noticing the sadness, we're not necessarily understanding kind of the why, that deeper why to the sadness.
You might. I'd hate to say you're not.
Oh, okay.
But
Yeah.
again, it just helps us pull apart some of the ways our type structure tries to go about getting our needs met.
Mhm.
Right? So the type structure goes around getting these needs met for love, connection, approval, etc., through this kind of reaching out, through the wanting, through the desire to get something. So if we can actually be aware, and so I'm like, oh, I'm starting, again, the connection's off. I'm going to reach out and call someone. Wait a minute. That's the type, right? That's the structure. I can take a pause there and I can actually be curious more about what's actually happening inside of me versus just following the automatic pattern. Is that helpful? Does that make sense?
Yeah, I was just trying to clarify what you meant by the deeper part. So yeah, I think that.
What you said initially is right. That kind of wanting something is below the emotional response to not getting it or having it be threatened or losing it. Yeah. Okay, thanks for the question, Maggie. So again, all heart types want to be seen in a positive light, to gain approval, all those things. This is our need, right? We want these things. So for twos, this desire for approval, I want you to like me, to see me as important in your life. That desire for approval propels helpfulness. right? It's the desire for approval that propels the activity. And the truth is, twos, and I'll say this about all the types, have a great gift for being helpful and generous. And it's not as if, I want to say this is like, it doesn't mean that we're always wanting to get, like, for all heart type centers, it's not like every activity we're just out to get our needs met. Sometimes we're just being generous. It's a flow from something greater. It's just that when we're working with things that are afflictive to us, difficult, often it's the approval that drives our desire to be helpful. And we want to be able to discern, is this a natural gift of generosity? Is this mine to really do? Right? Is this my turn? My giving is needed here, or is it not? And we want to be able to discern that. For threes, this desire for recognition. I need to be seen and recognized for my accomplishments, because that's what gives me a sense of value, being important, of being connected, etc. So that desire for recognition propels a lot of activities. There's a lot of doing, task, goal, etc. The next thing, going to the next thing, actually for the desire for recognition. And again, if we can pull that apart, we might see that, oh, I don't actually want to do that thing. This isn't my favorite job, right? It's just like we could actually pull that apart. So it's like, oh, this is the thing I need to be doing. It's important. It's a natural extension of kind of the greater reality. And my doing is part of that. It is mine to do, versus just the desire propelling it, the desire for recognition. And for fours, this desire for connection and for being really, I want to say, seeing as unique, propels the search for authenticity, right? So fours have a great capacity to be deep feelers, seeing, being empathic, of being authentic and wanting other people to be authentic, therefore expressing their truth, etc. But again, the search for authenticity, which can look like in a four, is like, oh, to be authentic, I need more of this quality, right? Or I need to do this or have this connection, etc., is different than actually just being as you are. When I think of authenticity, I think of just kind of being as you are. So the desire, it's a desire for connection that you before might believe authenticity will bring, that propels that search. And so again, we want to just be aware of that desire and overall to get something from outside so that we feel okay. And again, it's not bad. It's not wrong. It's a survival strategy. And if we want to just keep getting a little more free of the type, we want to have a little more space in how we respond, so we're not just on automatic. Okay. I'm going to move on unless anybody has another question. Okay. We think of the head center types as the aversion types. So mostly, from the head center point of view, it's like, again, it's like, what is arising for either inside or outside? It's kind of like a no, right? I don't want that. No, that's too much. But it's like a withdrawing into the head or pushing against what is arising. It's kind of aversion is kind of like a flight response. It's like, whoa, don't want to feel that. So all of us have, this is about what's unpleasant, right? All of us have the capacity to like pull away when something's unpleasant. Amoebas go towards something that actually is nourishing, amoebas, and they pull away from something that is aversive or not nourishing. So it's a very natural response. It's just that this tends to happen more in the head center, right? Is kind of a no in a sense. And I'll say more about that. But it's kind of a withdrawing away into the head to get away from what is ever arising in here that's perceived as unpleasant or out there. And the primary emotional response to this is fear, right? It's like, whoa, that's too much. That's not okay. I'm scared. It's intrusive. It's painful. Away, right? So there's all of this kind of pulling away. So fear is the primary emotional response, and sometimes fear with aggression. So it can also be fear with some sense of like kind of fighting back against it, but the primary emotional driver of the head center is fear. So again, major needs for all, the head center in general, but more primarily for dominant folks that lead with the head center is the desire for, or the need for certainty and security. We sometimes say safety, predictability, assurability, preparedness, kind of wanting to know what's going to come, right? So I want to figure things out. Again, we're in the head center now. It's like I need to figure out what's going to happen, how things are going to be, so that I can find a safe kind of avenue through the world. Okay. So fives have an aversion to intrusion, right? Fives have a very sensitive nervous system and can be easily overwhelmed either by their own emotional states or the needs and requests and demands from outside. And it can feel really intrusive. And to work with that, they look to self-sufficiency. So they have an aversion to intrusion, and that propels this search to be self-sufficient. I'm fine. I don't really need anything. Got everything I need right here. Thinking of my old teaching partner, you remember Carolyn Shuham, Nancy, and her husband was a 5. He's like, I've got 6 pair of socks, and I don't get a new pair of socks until one wears out, and then I get rid of that. I only have 6 pair of socks, right? It's just a way of like organizing the world to be self-sufficient. I am good. I'm fine. And oftentimes 5s really are fine, spending a lot of time alone, etc., taking care of their own needs. Now, of course, everybody needs connection, which we know that's true too. So it's this aversion, like, no, like too much. The world takes too much. That kind of propels this desire. Here's the desire word. This need for self-sufficiency, this orientation towards that. But it is kind of a pulling away. Own feelings, things from the world. 6s have an aversion to uncertainty and unpredictability, right? They want to figure things out, what's coming down the pike, so I can predict it, prepare for it, and then I'll be secure and safe, right? So it's all of that aversion to this world, which is uncertain, unpredictable. I think we imagine we have more control over things than we do. But anyway, it's like, if I can be prepared, I know what's coming, and therefore I can plan for it, and I'll be okay, right? So it's this aversion to this tendency of the world, even our own physical beings, of uncertainty and unpredictability, to keep looking to be prepared. 7s is a little tricky. But again, there's an aversion here to limitation and pain. I don't want to be limited. I might get trapped. I want to have lots of options. I want to stay up. I want to go to the next interesting thing, right? So it looks kind of like it's more like desire to me. But actually, all of that movement, what's next, is really more about this aversion to feeling limited, to feeling pain, to going into suffering. And that really propels a kind of optimistic attitude, right? It's like, all is good. I'm going to stay up here. We're going to go to the next interesting thing, etc. Right? So it propels a kind of optimism that sometimes is, again, a lot of these things are very genuine, but sometimes it's just a way of staying away from what you don't want that you're experiencing. So hopefully that made sense. I feel like I'm giving a weekend workshop in an hour. So please let me, I hope it's being clear, but if you have any questions, please feel free to just stop here for a second. Comments, questions.
I just wanted to say that this is very good, and to know that there's a whole workshop on it. This is coming at the right time for me, so thank you.
Oh, you're welcome. I can't see you, but I'm really grateful whoever said that. And I'm glad it's making sense. It's reassuring to me, connection and all that. So,
It was
Nancy.
Sana. Thanks, Sana.
I just have a comment. This is
Yeah.
Kelly.
Hi, Kelly.
Hi. As I went to Naropa too in the transpersonal program, but what I'm noticing is there seems to be some Buddhist influence, I would think, in what you're saying here. I don't know, but it's the Buddha said the cause of suffering is desire and or aversion, basically, and having neutral and equanimity for those things is the way to escape suffering. So it seems very similar to that.
This is Theravada Buddhism 101. So absolutely, this is Buddhist, Yeah. Thanks, Kelly.
You bet.
Okay. And again, I want to say this about like being a mindfulness practitioner. You don't have to believe in Buddhism or any kind of religion at all. It's really good psychology. So it's one of the things I really appreciate about it. So to the body center, which in this tradition was known as delusion. I also like the word ignoring. We sometimes talk about the body center as kind of being self-forgetting types, but we see that this center relies primarily upon delusion or ignoring things. It might be ignoring the truth of what a situation is internally or externally. Ignoring what's actually coming up in one's body, which, can very much happen. Imagining how things are when actually that isn't how things are. Body types have a great capacity to just kind of, in a sense, this is more from the defense system, but kind of just screen out unwanted things that don't fit with what you're trying to achieve, right? So I'll say more about each of the types. But again, it's kind of a forgetting and ignoring of what's actually occurring. And that can be internally or externally, again. And the primary emotional response often for this center is anger. And Oscar Ichazo said this specifically, I think more about the type 1, but I like this as a definition in this regard, which is anger is standing against what is actually occurring. So there's this thing occurring and it's like, no, it shouldn't be this way. It's not that way. I'm going to ignore that this is happening, right? It's a kind of standing against. So the anger in that way. So core needs for body center types, and all of us, of course, have a body center: worth, respect, belonging, integrity, autonomy, boundaries. I often think of the different centers in just kind of shorthand as being kind of the body center is kind of I, it's my earth self. I am my body, my place here in the world. The heart center is more like we, relationship. How are we doing today? Right. And the head center more is it, kind of figuring it out. So when we think of the body center, it's all these things that really, prove that we belong here, that we're worthy, that we have integrity or respect. Okay. So for 8s, there is often a delusion or ignoring around vulnerability. Like, what are some of the softer feelings? There might be sadness in there or fear, etc. But there's kind of an ignoring, not attending to, forgetting, deluding oneself about what's actually happening inside. It's really easy for 8s to do because of all that big energy. And again, none of these things are happening consciously. They're all happening unconsciously until we work with them and we have some choice. Then they're still happening unconsciously. But anyway, so denying the vulnerability, and that kind of propels all of this strength. I must be strong. right? It propels the activity of being a strong person, of having strength, because you don't want to feel this. So you must kind of have this strong persona. And that could also be even about, for instance, ignoring maybe like a truth, right? It's like, oh, somebody has a difference of opinion and like, well, that might actually be reasonable. But again, because you can't be vulnerable sometimes from an 8 point of view. So there's this tendency, it's like, no, I'm right? This is the truth. These are my opinions and this is the right way, right? So it propels this kind of ignoring of the vulnerability, propels the strength and the activity of being strong. For 9s, a delusion around conflict propels harmony. So we know from a 9 point of view, very important to keep the peace, be harmonious, make sure everybody's comfortable out there. And again, because of this misperception of, I would say, of conflict or the ignoring of it, thinking, oh, if there's conflict, there can't be harmony, right? Or there's going to be a loss of belonging, for instance, if there's conflict, right? That's often what happens. It's like, if I have a lot of opinions or desires or needs, etc., that actually it might be in conflict with somebody else, I'm going to keep those, down. So I'm going to try to, like ignore those things, not pay attention to them, or just make nice or do something, right? So it's like this delusion around conflict and what it really means and what it provides, and imagining that that's going to lose your sense of belonging or worth, that propels the search for harmony and the creation of harmony. Oftentimes very much at the cost of the 9, who might be feeling a lot of disharmony inside, a lot of discomfort. And for 1s, this kind of delusion around making mistakes. Like, if I make a mistake, I am not worthy, that's it, off, blah, 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 it's like, oh my God, I'm a horrible person. I'm bad. I'm wrong. So this delusion about what making a mistake means propels this attachment to being right, to rightness, right? I must be right. To be good, I must be right, which means not being wrong, not making mistakes. So again, versus making mistakes as human. We learn from mistakes. I made a mistake with the inner practice, and sometimes things just work out. It's just amazing, right? So again, it's like we're not quite seeing the truth about these things, if it's vulnerability, conflict, or mistakes in this center. And again, because we all have a body center, I think we can all kind of relate to all of these. Okay. We'll pause again. Is he still doing okay? Okay. Just interrupt if you need to. So getting close to the end. So how do we work with this? So there's all of this data. First of all, knowing that all of these experiences, all these afflictive emotions, if it's like the greed, aversion, and delusion, if it's anger, sadness, and fear, etc., is related to survival. It's brilliant. We wouldn't be here without them. From an evolutionary point of view, that is why we can self-reflect and why we can be here and actually think about choosing to do something differently. So they're amazing. I just want to say that these things are all, everything belongs, perfect as they are, right? So again, we want to really remember that we can bring kind awareness when these things come up, instead of, or kind awareness when the inner critic gets hold of it. It's like, yeah, it's really okay. Those things are really trying to help me, right? We constantly want to bring kind awareness to what's arising. If we can notice the underlying feeling tone before greed, aversion, and delusion, before anger, fear, and sadness, if we can actually start to be curious when something arises, even a thought has feeling tone. It's like, oh, I'm having this thought about, what do I want to say? This project I'm working on. And I notice like, it's a little scrunch in my forehead. I'm like, unpleasant, unpleasant, right? It's like, oh, wow. Okay. I can meet the unpleasant before anything else happens. Before I try to get away from it. Oh my God, I can't do this now. I've got to go eat a bar of chocolate. Right? It's like I can actually meet the pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral. And when pleasant arises, we can enjoy it, knowing it's not going to last, just like the unpleasant. And then the neutral, which we really has so many positive possibilities, well-being, when things are just nothing much is happening. If we really feel into neutral, Kelly said something about equanimity, right? There's peace. So neutral, which we often ignore because there's not much happening for the structures to do something with, is like, oh, this is maybe why we sit and meditate, maybe why we do yoga, to get in a place where things are just neutral. And so that's a really interesting place to explore, right? Really interesting place to explore. What's happening? Sometimes it's like we get anxious or we get bored, do you know? And then it's like, oh, so then we bring kind awareness to that. But otherwise, it's pretty amazing what one can experience when there's nothing happening. It might just be peace. Some other insight might arise, some intuition, some aspect of something greater, God, spirit, whatever you would call the great mystery. So the key to working with them is to bring attention to what is arising, right? What is arising, feelings, sensations, etc., and to meet them with kindfulness. And here's the little abbreviated somatic practice that we use in the narrative. Notice when something's arising, whatever layer you're noticing. Pause. The pause. Crucial. Can I interject a pause versus going on the ride again? Can I take a breath? If you pause for 3 seconds, if you pause for 5 seconds, you've intervened in this well-practiced wheel, and that makes a difference over time. And if we can pause and then bring attention and allow ourselves to notice what's going on inside and bring kind awareness to it, we see what happens. We don't know, but we see. So we see what arises. So notice, take a pause, 3 breaths, 1 breath, and allow yourself to have the experience you're having. And that doesn't mean just running around in the story about it. You might have a story about it, like, well, there's the story. If you have a story, there's often, mostly, some kind of feeling or sensation associated with it. So we're trying to get into kind of the core of our experience. I'm going to stop before I put the questions up and just see if anybody has comments or questions. Thank you for your attention.
You did such a great job. No one's
That's very kind. Nancy knows how to take care of and soothe me. Yeah,
Donna.
Donna.
Thank you. I'm really enjoying this. I wrote down, maybe we experience peace when nothing is happening. Is that what you said? And if that's what you said, could you say more about it? I really liked that.
Yeah. Peace, you know, again, in the mindfulness tradition, what we oftentimes, the feeling of nothing, of neutral. Oh, sorry. I've got these reactions that I have on my computer now. Is peace. So peace is kind of a, I don't want to call it. Well, let me ask you a question, Donna. How would you define peace?
The absence of conflict.
And so what does it feel like? So there's no conflict.
Tenderness, flow, just goodness. I don't know.
Yeah. So, then, so an absence of conflict, whenever we look at something and it's like we want to define it by what's missing, do you know that's a great first step? And so then what is the experience of that like? The first thing you said was tenderness.
Mhm.
Right? Peace to me too is like this okayness, right?
Mm.
Like nothing really needs to change. Like everything's okay. It's not like ecstasy or joy or something. It's like, it's like the perfect breeze on the perfect spring day. Does
Thank
that
you.
help? Yeah.
Yeah, that's great. It's a great thing to keep in mind.
Yeah. Thank you. Thanks for your chats too. I love that, Nancy. Forgetting that we are love. Indeed, we are.
Yeah,
Do you want to say more about that?
well, yeah, for me as a type 2, I see that as fueling that desire. So I'm seeking love, but how I get out of that self-defeating loop is by connecting with myself, thus the name of what I do. And and remembering that love is what I am. I just am so blown away that we're never taught that, and no type is taught that.
Yeah.
And all the hallmark and all the marketing is you got to get love, you got to buy love, you got to consume love.
And if you get a little, you need more.
And if you get a little, you need more because you don't have it and it's not going to last. And it's all a lie.
I will share one quick experience. This was some years ago, and I was not doing anything particular, but I had this arising just of love in my body. It was just like, there was nobody there. I immediately wanted to reach out and call somebody and tell them I love them. Right? It's like, oh, it was like, well, wait a minute, Renee, this is just in you. Like it doesn't have nothing activated it other than just an essence quality, right? So I love that you share that.
Yeah, and that's what you're talking about with Donna too. And it's for all types. If we just hold the stillness, the non-doing, the being, the
Yeah.
being, the mindful practice, it comes, and it comes from the void. And the void is so darn scary to most of us. And if we just sit with it, it comes.
Yeah.
And it's so cool. Yeah.
And on the meantime, on that journey, we meet the discomforts that, of course, because the type pattern is like, type patterns are all about activity. I don't care what your type is. It's all about doing something, right? Managing something, creating something, doing something. It's about activity, right? So being receptive, it feels very stimulating. And then we have to be really kind and aware about how much we can tolerate, when we actually need, a resource, when we need to pop in, oh, this is making me really anxious. So yeah, I'm going to go to my feet, which could be a great resource, or I'm going to distract myself. Sometimes that's really necessary, right? Like we be kind to ourselves on the journey into finding space as a pleasurable thing. So yeah.
Sometimes you can sit there and feel the fullness of the now.
Totally.
You're not going away to anything. You're not going to anything. It's just full now, and there you go.
And wonderful. It is a good thing, a good place to be, visit, hang out, live from as much as possible, actually. And I think one of the other things that we learn along the path is that everything doesn't have to be at peace to be okay. Right? It's another important ingredient as we work with ourselves. It's like, oh, you know what? I might be feeling anxious about something. And if I actually check in with part of me, I'm still okay. Anxiety can be here and I can be okay. That's freedom. where everything doesn't have to look one way or the other, so. Okay, so you guys ready to go chat so I can quit chatting? Let's see. I'm gonna put up the share. So we're gonna put you in groups of 3 or 4, depending on numbers, based on your dominant center. And I would just like you to talk like maybe 15 minutes. How long do you think, Nancy? 15?
Yeah, I have them set for 15.
15. Like, so what came up for you? I like this, didn't like that, or this made sense, I don't understand, whatever it is, what came up? And how do you relate to what I have described as the primary afflictive emotion of greed, aversion, or delusion? If you decide I'm a heart type, but it's more about aversion, fine, you can talk about, you know what I mean? Like, again. And then what's your experience of it? If you pick greed, what's the experience of it? How often do we lean it forward, Nancy? Because we want
All
some.
the time.
I know. I practice keeping my back glued to my chair, right? So how do you experience it, head, heart, and body? And how can you bring more kind awareness to it? And maybe we can copy these in the chat.
Sure.
If that works, that would be great.
Right. So there's 2 rooms of 3. The rest of you get